Wonderful to see everyone. Let me welcome you. Since I recognize virtually everyone, I'm not going to introduce myself. Um, and I normally play this role with these book discussions as host. This is something that we've been doing now for over a year at the EGS. And I want to acknowledge the role of Nemanja Mitrovic in this. He's the one who launched the idea and has made much of this possible, and he's making it possible today. Though you won't see him, he tends to hide behind the screen, but he is more or less the one who makes this possible operationally, as well as he did in getting it started. So thanks to Nemanja for that. And I have the role of hosting, and it's a very great pleasure. These have been very really delightful occasions. There are opportunities for the EGS to recognize the work of the faculty, or sometimes people who are closely associated with us. We do tend to try to focus on faculty publications to strengthen the awareness of among our community of what's going on. So the book discussion is really it's a friendly discussion. It's not meant to be it's not meant to be another exam situation. It's rather
Now
a
you tell
conversation.
me.
Well, you'll get your grades afterwards, but that's not a public matter. No, it really is meant to be a friendly exchange and a thoughtful exchange where we all get to know this work a little bit better and get some different perspectives on it. So it's been a really very positive and pleasurable experience for us, and I think we can expect the same this afternoon. And I'm really delighted that everyone is here. I can see that some people are in relative darkness, other people are in light. So we have an international audience as usual. But I'm coming to you from a cold New York, as is Avi, and Susan Bernstein is probably in a colder Brown at Providence, Rhode Island. And Mina, I'm not sure where you're speaking from. Are you in New York right now?
Yes, I'm also in New York.
Okay, good. All
Mhm.
right. Let me say two words of introduction. I don't need to introduce Avi, evidently. So I will not pause there, but I would like to say just a couple words about Susan Bernstein, who is joining us for the first time, and I'm really very happy that she's able to do that. She's a professor of comparative literature and also a professor of German studies at Brown University. And she works in German, French, English, and American traditions in the modern period, I guess from 18th century forward. She has very strong theoretical interests and has been a very active participant in theoretical discussions, which I would say have centered in the deconstructive world in the US, but go beyond that, certainly. And she's been a very important contributor. She wrote a book that was published with Stanford in 1998, entitled Virtuosity of the 19th Century, Performing Music and Language in Heine, Liszt, and Baudelaire. And I'm just citing this particular one because I'm hoping to enlist her by this means in some of the work we're trying to do in our new Institute for Music and Philosophy. Perhaps Susan will be able to join us there. She's also she's published in many other topics and authors, both continental and American, as I've said, through the modern period. I believe I can mention that she has been working with Kevin McLaughlin on a Benjamin project. I hope that's okay. I mentioned that, Susan, which has I understand that the next volume to come out will be on the topic of the task of the translator, and this should be, as I understand, a new critical edition, but also commentary, and this should be a really important contribution. So we're eager to see that. And by mentioning this, I just want to give a little shout out to Kevin McLaughlin, who has joined us in not so distant past as a member of our governing board at the EGS. So it's wonderful to have Kevin with us and to know about this work that he's doing there in Benjamin with Susan. Um, So welcome to you, Susan. Thank you for participating tonight.
Thanks, Chris.
Mina Cheon is it's I'm sorry,
Mina Cheon.
Cheon. Oh, excuse me.
It's okay.
It's been a while. I was about to say it's
Yes.
been a while. I got to Mina at NYU recently, and this wonderful face from the past arose, and but for me, it's a strangely present past because Mina was working with Avital at EGS, graduated in 2008, did with a PhD. The topic was, or at least when it was published, it became shamanism and cyberspace. And I'm just completely shocked to see that in her bio now, she lists herself as a professor emeritus at the Maryland Institute College of Art, which is MICA. And I'm sorry, but I'm still back in 2008. What do you mean, Professor Emeritus? How did that happen? Retired. Somehow I missed a few years there. But it is quite delightful and surprising to recognize what happens with the passage of time. Mina is a new media artist, known for her goes as a polypop art, and it's inspired by pop art and socialist realism. But she's also, and this is something I didn't know, I have to acknowledge and apologize for, she has a parallel body of work going on under an alter ego's name, Kim Too Soon. Do I say two for the II? Is that right?
Kim Il-sung,
Okay.
daughter of Kim Il-sung.
I was thinking that, but anyway, and this is a multimedia form of art, as I understand, which addresses the very complex history and the precarious coexistence of North and South Korea. But fascinating. I'm very eager to learn more about that. But I'm really very happy to welcome Mina to this discussion. And to have this chance to catch up a bit after some significant time, really. So Avital is, of course, well known to you. She will launch our discussion with a presentation, and then we will have contributions from each of our participants, our guests, and I will follow up, perhaps if there is time and need, with perhaps a couple thoughts and remarks. So let us then get started. Avi, if you're ready. I haven't mentioned I haven't mentioned our topic, America, this troubled continent of thought, and of course it is an extremely timely, and maybe I suppose I should also say untimely publication for our moment, and in that respect, I think particularly important. So it's wonderful to be able to have this discussion on in this start of a quite troubling new epoch for America. So with that, Avi, let me pass the screen to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you, everyone, beloveds, for showing up. I think we need one another with a sense of desperate distress. I see that Jeremy is up at 3 in the morning. What a lovely time warp that I'm trying to leak into. I see so many names and friends, all of whom I want to express my gratitude for and to. And you know that this work comes out of a lot of conversation and tears of teary, as Werner Hamacher used to say. And I'm shaken, I'm shook, as we say in New York, by what's going down on our watch. I see Alan is there, who's written abundantly and brilliantly on some of the motifs and themes that I try to approach, reproach, and and attack, as we say, in a kind of anal, military, sadistic way when we go after our work and our objects. Right now, in the sense of Melanie Klein, we probably need to build a good object on a daily basis, because the level of Aggressionstrieb, so the aggression drive that Freud put up before the death drive, with which he then ran us down, is something that we need to reattune our beings to, as we take the slams of great expropriative violence from all around. So we need to woman up and really try to fit into the 2+ genders that were just declared. And, you know, that might sound stupid, and that's one of the motifs of a long reflection that I've had, stemming from America, but also Europe, to the extent that America is bulked up by European rejects and stale inventories of thought that get distorted and refreshed in a crazy, fucked up American incomprehensible way. Something's going on that requires real fine-tuning to structures of ambivalence that psychoanalysis really insists upon. It's hard to stay with ambivalence because one wants to strike back in certain ways. But as philosophical sensibilities that we're fine-tuning all the time, and innate dialecticians who can flip the script and try to run with transvaluative fervor that Nietzsche taught us, maybe we can recognize and stay cool and calm, though it's hard right now, that as Lacoulabat instructed and wrote abundantly, every nationalistic mythology that they run with comes from a philosophical appropriation of poetry. So it's not only about German soldiers rushing the killing fields with their little Hölderlin in their backpacks and other warrior poets who urged anything but what they were actually doing. The poet, as Benjamin has taught us, actually took the hits and eviscerated their body, receiving poetic language and retransmitting it to us. So there never wasn't a war zone, also in terms of how poetry bulks up on its insight and sense of finitude and destructive urgencies. But I want to say, as I've been assigned to do, not only by practical reason, but by Chris and Nemanja, which is even more formidable in transcendental power terms, to explain this book that grew in the precincts of your friendship, all of you, each of you. There's not one of you who hasn't given me a little dose of the philosophy America and hasn't helped me refine the argument, lean into the anger that is a problematic motif. And I noticed in reviewing the book that I try to run with it very problematic. What is the agony of anger that could be inserted into a speculative history? How much anger constitutes a political body or a nation state, and the phantasms that attended. I'm very compelled by anger also because Lacan insisted that Freud ruled it out, or Freud didn't engage anger. And why would that be? I think Lacan had his own tactical reasons for saying that, because Freud went up against Moses and the tradition, which is a very angry outburst. And then we could think in terms of Hannah Arendt's thinking, Hannah being an immigrant to America. And of course, she tripped up a little on some of the American minefields, disturbing a sense of righteous integration. Yesterday was very American because it's a split off of Martin Luther King Jr. Day, and it's opposite as the salute of Elon Musk from South Africa marked for us. So I don't know, anger. So for Hannah Arendt, the immigrant, there's justified anger, which is the justification of anger is a Roman innovation. And the anger that makes you ugly, and she goes into the facial contortions that anger promotes. But she also starts off modernity with Lessing's legendary anger. Lessing was someone who started to embody what we can call with psychoanalysis, and especially Melanie Klein's morph of it, urethral sadism. Now, many of you know what anal sadism is and oral sadism, but urethral sadism, which is linked to ambition, competitiveness, a kind of capitalist relentlessness and ugliness, fugliness, has to do with fantasies of drowning, poisoning, and peeing. So we have a whole vocabulary on the ground of I'm pissed off. So that's part of an offshoot of anger, political anger and different kinds of anger, or piss on you, or gee, I say that with a lot of verve. Let me calm down. Or I'm pissed, which could also mean drunk. And I've pissed off a lot of money just supporting all of these contenders that fizzled out. So I don't want to be pissy about all these things, but I do want to include the way we, let's say, appropriate Hannah Arendt's subgenre of political action that could include a thinking of anger. What incites anger? Does it have, I mean, I was talking to Sarah about her work. I hope it's not secret, but we were talking about, is it a secret, Sarah?
No, you're welcome to say anything. I trust you.
Thank you. Don't trust me. Thank you. Sinners in the hands of an angry God. So even in Benjamin also, there's the divine tantrum. But how does anger become a political for a politically transferable value, how can we be angry without fizzling out, without self-destructive verve? And these are some of the questions that also go into the book America. How does anger get sublimated to law? What are the subterranean logics of anger that can't be expressed? And then how is this connected to grievance and grief? Because we know we're in the abyss of grievance with the current German-backed and bred and disavowed president, whose name used to be Trumpf, so with an F. And if I had a chance to run with the signifiers, I would start maybe arbitrarily with Adorno's F factor, which is already seen as the fascistic factor in American democracy. So he was already tracking it, the F factor. The F factor that fell off the Trump name. Trump pretended to be Swedish for a while because he thought New York, he and Frederick, his sadistic father, thought that there were too many Jews in New York. So being in charge of the real estate empire, they didn't want their sometimes fantasied empire, sometimes serious material runaway empire of success. They thought it'd be better to promote themselves as Swedish rather than German. But the work on America, which is, I can only give you a partial print today, as much as I would like to rant for hours. On his birthday, Derrida would call meetings at Cerisy in Normandy in France, where Heidegger also gave his lecture and others. Derrida would give a lecture for 12 hours as his birthday present to us. Now I'm beginning to appreciate it. Anyway, I can only give a few minutes and retrieve a partial print. But, and I understand, and I wanted to say that I understand that we're facing a wind tunnel of unshieldedness right now and an increasing eco-glacialization of all the tropologies and efforts and activists and backbreaking writing we've done. And yet this is what is called for. Artists to keep their work ethic, even if it's the most, I mean, scholars are a targeted species right now, as you know. There's all sorts of threats being called on the things that we do and those that we love and wish we could protect. So one wants to somehow, from this abyss of horror, anger, shock that begins with Lessing, who confounded the Germans, by the way, because he was, as in his Nathan der Weise, not Nathan the Wise, he Muslim hugging, Jew loving, Christian tolerating in his thematic passions. He always insisted on the also impossible encounter, or what Celan would call the counter in the encounter, the Gegen in the Begegnung, or the Contre in the Rencontre, and so on and so forth. What puts you up against the other in alterity and allergy and quivering bodies that you bring to the encounter. Lessing wasn't naive. His anger was very, very unique, as Hannah Arendt explains when she ambivalently accepts the Lessing Prize from very recently former Nazis who now want to use her to show that they're friends. So one of the utterances of the angry Lessing is, we must. He repeats the must, so there's an injunction. Wir müssen be friends. It's like an imperative. And how is this possible? Here we could go to Derrida's suicide hotline for such questions, and also questions of the fragility of democracy. In Rogues and elsewhere, to try to understand, and Mary Shelley on how America blew it from day one because the conquest was too violent and too rapidly executed. She's not against conquest, Mary Shelley, but she said it was too fast, and the slaughter and genocidal fervor of hitting the indigenous peoples was bound to monstrously haunt America, and it's certainly its epicenter in the United States in ways that would not be erasable. You may know that Hitler loved America because it was shamelessly genocidal in order to get its startup. And that there's something about the genocidal instinct that America always already or a priori released, and that is now showing in certain ways. Not that we were ever clean, I'm saying we provisionally, but necessarily, or so I do investigate the phantasms and the hype of the goodness of America, which is very, very much part of the self-reflective discourse, and a certain kind of need, even if it's siphoned off into weird distortions of Christianity or whatever lunatic sports we're playing. It has to be good, which is in itself a metaphysical dilemma. Now, when I say metaphysical, I want to say, which I should have said from moment one, from the start gate, that there are things about the paraconcept of America that are philosophically premised, poetically backed or punctured, depending on who's at the wheel, and theoretically locked in. And that's where we come in. Like, what are the philosophical, let's say, ground rules of constructing something like America that wants to be great again? I want to just say, by having thrown that out, is that this is a philosophical engagement and problem, and requires all of the discursive donations that we've received from our great masters and mastresses, whom I invite to join us in this, who are no longer with us, but strongly close to us in their nearness, in their incomparable nearness. And we want to understand what makes it even possible in its most depraved, destituted, emptying ways, and alienating language games, to understand how philosophically pumped and what kind of philosophical supremacies boost some of the distortions that go into imagining America. And I know America is a problematic signifier. The publisher stuck me with it. Nonetheless, it started catching my attention in all sorts of ways. First, discussing with Chris the nihilistic disclosure that the Trump brand leveraged violently upon us, not as an aberration or a sudden crash landing by aliens or something, but as something very much part of the autoimmune lab that America and its destructive jouissance, including the narcotically stuffed populace and so on and so forth. I mean, there's some wonderfully quasi-sublimated aspects of our destructive jouissance in music, in art, in all sorts of post-punk antics and attitudes. So it also broke up Europe in a certain way that needs to be followed, and provided an itinerary that is completely baffling, operatic, maddening, and yet kind of recognizable. So let me, I hope I'm not getting on your nerves, but I do want to indicate something about nerves right now. Not only if we're nervous, but because so many rights are being ripped away, taken away, confiscated, and desecrated, I want to remind us of Benjamin, for Elisa and others who have written tomes on Benjamin. And of course, Susan Bernstein, who's a formidable Benjamin scholar. So for Benjamin and Karl Kraus, a really fabulously malicious, brilliant Austrian pal to all of us, there was something called the rights of nerves. And Benjamin would bring up the rights of nerves as a heuristic legitimizing device, meaning it's when one wonders about the genesis of one's work, or the prod, almost the Heideggerian Stoß, or what it is that smacks you into a certain kind of awareness. Is it on the level of nerves? And here you could take the off-ramp with one of our great teachers at EGS, Friedrich Kittler, and Schreber, also a teacher, but he didn't exactly show up in person, but in posthumous ways he does. To what extent does the rights of nerves, first of all, how does this in any way get readable or unreadable in terms of Benjamin's thinking on the critique der Gewalt, or the critique of violence? And by rights of nerves, I'm still near the urethral sadistic corner of the thinking on America, which means, how do you start up a thinking agent or engine by through the nerves that are ready to snap or break or can't take it anymore or are pissed off. So what kind of sublimations are required? What kind of disavowals? Because sometimes you have to calm it down and become very, very constrained. And this is especially important now when debate and discursive illuminations and engagements are hyperbolically desecrated and disdained, right? Are you going to debate them? And this is something that has troubled already Plato, and the question of justice and who's going to be part of the discursive sentinel class, meaning, can you protect the premises of debate? Of course, as a tween academic, I went up against those kinds of premises because Plato does start up his exclusionary operation, meaning you're not going to let an idiot debate you. So they're out. And so on. Of course, I adore the idiot and I look for the special idiolect, marginalized, and a whole history of idiots in romantic poetry that have a special attunement to being. So now I wonder, and then Lyotard in Le Différent, he describes different kinds of impossible interlocutors. Like, how are you going to argue with someone who believes in Martians? And it turns out, guess who believes in Martians? Our contemporary political panel of idiots. So nonetheless, Lyotard says there are different levels of taking on the other. And this is something that's very poignant and necessary for us to consider. For example, when do you have to beat a retreat, find a different phrasal regime, fall into silence, or flip everyone out like Rousseau did when he beat a retreat, a strategic retreat. Schiller was very disappointed that Rousseau, when we needed him politically, said, I think I'm going to go into the mediated shade of a retreat. See ya. Paul de Man was very perplexed that, but tried to rescue and recuperate in some ways. I'm simplifying. Rousseau's retreat by saying it's, don't confuse retreat with sheer passivity, where I would then refer us to one of my teachers, Muhammad Ali, and of course, the rope-a-dope, where you let yourself get beaten until the opponent, the adversary, is exhausted, and then you rise up and return the favor and win, according to Muhammad Ali. I mean, that's one of the what are the strategies of diving deep into a stupid America? I mean, Chris, I don't know if you remember saying that the stupidity of Americans has been sorely underestimated. Anyway, with the rights of nerves, which includes certain kind of embodied opening toward outrage and rage, you kind of also think of Nietzsche, where indignity and injustice hit you, affect your immune system, make you want to puke. And Nietzsche was the great philosopher of throwing up, which Deleuze, whose anniversary was recent, reminded us is a way of reversing dialectics. So you're not, you know, kind of, oh, I just did a Zizek thing because we said dialectics and it triggered me, my rights of nerves here. So let me just say that I introduced Nietzsche because I have a Nietzschean way of trying to transvaluate, hitching a ride on Nietzsche, America. And I'm saying it probably too fast and rudely, but Nietzsche liked the way Americans flipped on a dime or turned on a dime, didn't believe in their own identity. And if one could, just for an abstract and impartable moment, look at Trump and see the fakery and fuckery and absolute nihilistic affirmation of fake values. And I'm saying it's way too quickly, but for Nietzsche, that would be the only thing that could be skimmed off momentarily if it weren't so horrifying and vulgar, which, if I may speak for him, and sometimes her, because Nietzsche was also a trans person, an Übermensch, as Heidegger pointed out. Nietzsche liked that Americans didn't believe in anything substantial about themselves. They were fast on switching up identities. They didn't believe really in God, even though they're in a kind of obscene excess of Jesus-loving mania as a kind of disavowal. And all this "in God we trust." People are very concerned, or whatever, that Trump didn't put his hand on the Bible proffered to him by the authentic Melania wife function. So let me just say that there's something about American test sites, no matter how condemned, impardonable, disastrous they are, that Nietzsche, who was a little too much of an adolescent at times, but still did approve. Of course, on the next page, he thinks Americans are insane with greed and so on. True. But the way that America refuses to yield an essence of itself in its Selbstbehauptung, self-affirmation, self-understanding. So one of my questions is, what is the self-understanding? And let me just say that there's a lot to be said. I just want to roll fast now and let others speak. I will just say that the gauntlet was thrown on the status of America by philosophers who were reading poetry and poets. The great poet Rilke says, America is a monstrosity, it's a void. Heidegger shuddered about the emptiness, what I call the Gestell from hell, that America represents. So it's humming along technologically, but and here you have both Max Weber and Heidegger. There's an Entzauberung, so in Max Weber, it's disenchanted. And for Heidegger, it's a problem of Entgötterung, which is de-divinization. You remember when once Heidegger famously said, nur noch ein Gott. Only a God could save us now. We're so fucked up. Well, the gods didn't even get a travel pass to America. They never squatted here. So there's something about the steady kind of refusal of something that would touch one's so-called spirituality. But here you get, you know, a Nietzschean transvaluation. I know I'm taking a fast track here. It's a little fast, but we can discuss. Because, well, let me just say that a metonymy for all this are houses, American houses. Rilke and Heidegger and others say that American houses have no ancient ancestral spirituality. They're prefab, they're whatever. There's no, we don't house ghosts or even the undead, really. And yet we're obsessed culturally with phantoms and vampires and zombies. It's an obsession, a cultural overgeneration of that which America doesn't have. So our housing projects are already like part of this vacancy of suburbia that can't be shaken off in the American idos. Freud isn't so critical. He's amazed when he's explaining obsessional neurosis about the way that houses get translocated on trucks. You know, those trucks in America that just remove a house from its location and replant it somewhere. For Freud, that kind of emblematic cipher for displacement was very important and certainly had psychoanalytic implications that of unrootedness and uprootedness. Again, that could be good news because for Nietzsche, there's two types of nomadism or two types of homelessness. The cool kind that keeps you going and rolling and like a rolling stone, Americanisms, or the other kind that is destitute, nuclear disaster zone, the desert. So there's two kinds of, for Nietzsche, at least two that we should be aware of that America hosts and promotes. These are just a 2-second kind of look at things. I do want to say that if there's a neuralgic point here or to the argument that I propose, it has to do with the way America has been reviled in philosophy and tagged with having only shown stunted philosophical growth. And this is taken up by one of the great American philosophers, Stanley Cavell, who, reading Wittgenstein, wonders if America can philosophize. And Wittgenstein also writes at a certain moment, we're sending our professors over to America. And even though they have no philosophy, do we have anything to teach them? So America has been unabashedly reviled by philosophers, European philosophers, and this has never been seen, to my knowledge, as part of their fundamental insight, argument, restructuring, reconfiguration of things and thought. It's never been questioned. It's uninterrogated. America sucks. Let's move on. And yet it's an object of fear and fetishization that seems to me to be very, very important. By the way, I see that Alec is here, and he's written a beautiful dissertation recently, largely concerned with Susan Bernstein's work. So I just wanted to introduce you. And I think one of the major attacks that I kind of ground in this insight that was troubling to me is that there's a return of overblown Germanity in our public discourse, in the American psychic makeup, and tropological regressions to Germanic, to the Germanic, let's say, repression. Lyotard had said that when Nazism was purportedly defeated, we, the Western metaphysical, post-metaphysical culture, let it down like a rabid dog. It wasn't worked through. It was about, he was fairly certain it would return in certain ways. And so I think I took a cue from him to wonder about the forms and deformities of that return here. Here meaning where we're backed up against a hermeneutic wall of another kind of Germanity that deserves lots of study and consideration, and has also received some. But let's say America as a receptacle of repressed German aggressions. And you know how super squeaky clean Germanity now tries to see itself as, and in many ways, the green clean is very much to be lauded in other efforts and considerations on behalf of social justice. But how long did it take for the new Nazis to show up and the American Nazis to grow in their image? And this would be, let's say, part of Lyotard's prophetic despair, that we don't take psychoanalysis seriously enough. We don't work shit through, and we don't recognize the philosophical, metaphysically laden basis for all the horror that is legitimated by a philosophical mainmise. The mainmise in Lyotard parlance is this throttle or stranglehold that is so immense that we don't even see it. I think of what he describes kind of in terms of the Twilight Zone, where at the end of an episode, you'll see a little girl who's a giantess who's been playing with you in her dollhouse. So there's something so pernicious that you don't see it. If we were to continue the mapping and itineraries and the sorrowful trek of repressive returns, we would have to acknowledge the return of the compulsive repetition horrors that that motivate Israel.
Avi, shall we
We better
take
before
that as a provisional wrap? And I got on just a little bit late in the pre-meeting, and I don't know if we agreed on an order going forward. But as Mina is perhaps
We must have order.
We must have order. So I do actually have a German background. So I will, I'd like to, Susan, if it's okay with you, I will invite Mina to follow with her remarks and then let you have the third bat. So Mina, if you'd like to begin, that would be wonderful. Thank you. And thank you, Avi, for those incredibly rich remarks. And, you know, it's a ton to think about.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Mina, please.
Yes, thank you, Chris. Thank you, Avital. Only had I heard you speak before I had a chance to write, I would have a different response. But thank you, Avital Ronell, for the beautiful opportunity for me to participate in this book discussion. I also extend my gratitude to Christopher Finks and EGS for including me in your public lecture series. It's also a pleasure to meet you, Susan Bernstein, and I look forward to our continued exchanges. And hello to my EGS colleagues and friends. I'm deeply honored to share my reflections on Avital Ronell's America, the troubled continent of thought. As I contemplated my role as an interlocutor, I found it most fitting to present the narrative of philosophy in America or its absence as an artist. This response, akin to a philosophic art song, thought piece, or woke poetry, is a tribute to Avital Ronell's profound work that keeps me thinking and learning. She has to put earmuffs on so that she could block out the noise of America, especially during these past days leading up to the presidential inauguration on MLK Day yesterday. As Trump 2.0 takes office and his peeps party on, the road he takes is the MLK Boulevard to run another man down. Today, we're left with the skid marks to the event, as if Martin Luther King Jr. wasn't already assassinated. Trump had to do it all over again on King's Resurrection Day. Being the day after assassin inauguration and the proclaimed beginning of the golden age of America, I wake up again. I reflect on the generosity of time and how philosophy breathes the way it takes shape. Jacques Derrida foresaw Ronell's book, America, and she picked up his unfinished project for a reason. Ideas float and transfer intergenerationally, and over time, philosophy works transcontinentally. Derrida's ideas and Ronell's, her stories, are hosted from one body to another, coming to a fuller shape and delivery, crystallize at optimal openings. This moment may be one such opening in America. Reading Derrida's quote in her book about how deconstruction in America were two open sets, which intersect partially according to an allegorical metonymic figure, how America would have been his title of a new novel in his fiction of truth, of the history of deconstruction and deconstruction of history. I understand why this is Ronell's entry quote to part 2 of the book, The Gestell from Hell, a Lean, Mean Fighting Machine. The philosophical rapprochement, deconstruction, and America is critical in its application to today's American context, where we return to WWW, not just the World Wide Web we live in, but the Wild Wild West as America, and American World War wins. Forgive me if I'm wrong or if I misunderstood. As I understood it, the fighting machine is deconstruction, philosophy, and all the poetry and art assigned in relation. As I imagine femme fatale Avital Ronell as the heroine of a manga series with a pink machine gun where her arsenal was shooting philosophy, part 2 of her book, America, was definitely fully loaded. The Troubled Continent of Thought is a transformative literary journey with its 2 parts. The first part, Unfriending the Gods, paints a philosophical portrait of America and its political and historical landscape, revealing how a morally bankrupt nation can stifle philosophy or question its relevance. For in a God's nation, as told, there is only room for forging a colorblind, merit-based, 2-gender-only policy country. The second part, Gestell from Hell and the Fighting Machine, heralds the resurgence of philosophy as a weapon of hope and philosophic possibility. And I notice an auspicious parallel. Derrida outlines two open sets, deconstruction and America. And the book America also splits into two parts, one laying the historic grounds as to the setup for why America can't philosophize, and two, why philosophy matters for America and what deconstruction has to do with it. I read the book as such. Again, the philosophical storytelling on mapping America, posturing how America devours its own philosophy. American rogue political economic system capitalizes on its own vulnerability and poverty by reproducing it in a cycle of violent abyss, and the law is misconfigured for said purposes. This metaphor, America eats America, suggests that America's political and economic system exploit philosophical ideas and values it claims to uphold, leading to a cycle of destruction and disillusionment. From Jacques to Aline, to Jacques to Avital, deconstruction is America. This D-America is a shapeshifter continent coded not by bipartisanship and power, but animated by dance forms of thoughts, drumbeats of philosophy, mosaic poetry, and gestural art. By deconstructing America, America is mapping America by changing the contours to be a place and space of philosophical possibility beyond a land of propagated promised opportunity. America is commonly mapped out by red and blue states, effaced with coded visual data updated hourly that contours the map with election results, climate alerts, gentrification loci, and not to forget the cellular range. I wonder if we could create a new visual system that shows hotspots of philosophy and creativity and see it like the way Professor Xavier in X-Men sees all mutants in time and space through his telepathic creative powers. Because what artists do is very much in line with what philosophers do. We ideate, not only make or create. Having a visual map of creativity and the creative foil in America would be a more informative and profound way of seeing the continent. Although philosophy is never where you expect to find it, according to Ronell, America needs help with a big target sign on its forehead for the practice of philosophy shooting. At least a bullseye can be directed for philosophy's survival of America or America's survival of philosophy. Because this troubled continent of thought has become the breeding grounds for new masculinity, Elon Musk and his army clones, they have already found a new land in outer space Mars. Whatever maps are left are of this newer version of old America. People mapping it would rather throw it out unreadly on their way to their new colony. The Americans of the new golden age need no time to leave their wasteland, leaving America shut in its own ecosystem of post-capitalist bankruptcy that banks on poverty, famine, global conflicts, war, environmental destruction, animal and human extinction, and forever to encapsulate the hazardous ozone they create. Because this America is so big with many parts to be replicated and morphed in little countries and their own America towns, the echo of its structure is global, and anti-philosophy in America is a worldwide phenomenon. Anti-philosophy as a rejection or devaluation of philosophical thought and its prevalence in America has global implications. We have witnessed a resurgence of anti-hero vigilantes for whom the Gen Is especially relate. Luigi Mangione, for example, is a figure rising from the American suffrage campaign. Images of Luigi appearing not so randomly, even in Shanghai nightclubs, is because there are many, many Elons in all pockets of the world. American wannabe conglomerate fintech princes who rule and draw their maps of their own countries. The clashing of classes continue between petty tyrants and homegrown suicide bombers and hashtag free Luigi. As Avital ends the book with a good night, farewelling America, here her earmuffs are telling that she is saying goodbye and shutting off the American syndrome, hoping to wake up differently or perhaps indifferent. While you're sleeping, I too was dreaming. In my dreams, I saw you as Miss President being inaugurated. The inauguration occurred at EGS in New York because it was too cold and expensive for us to go to the White Mountain College in the Alps. All the thinkers and tinkers came together wearing earmuffs in a colloquium, and we were an earmuffs nation in a retreat. The shared governing economic policies that were talked about were not about TikTok switching on or off, global warfares and terrorists, but about building infrastructure and economies, growing intellectual and cultural wealth and artistic happiness, and creative resources and capacities. The inaugural party included artistic collaborations and installations, Dadaist poetry, hip hop philosophy, and unconventional performance media art parties. And we were no longer hungry. We spoke deconstruction. Avital once told me, someone asked her why she lived in America. She says she lives in New York, not America. From the city, not broken lands, Brooklyn of America, I pulled out one final passage from her book that I thought was directed at me personally. Page 16, she says, one must ask whether any nation state fronted by the performative ploy of united is not masking disintegration and the spread of noxious break-off points. Surely I thought she was addressing this to me. And indeed, she was talking not only about America's peacemaker and unifier manipulative gibberish, but the truthful conundrums of Korea. As I am a Korean and my expertise is the Koreas, and because I'm the Korean artist who paints the Korean unification flag entitled Dreaming Unification Protest Peace, I dug up buried in her America the philosophic dilemma between dreaming and protest. With my political pop artworks, we, as in myself and Kim Il-sung, raise the art Korean unification flags high in the air. These paintings are presented as cascading figures in parades. Each land, the Korean peninsula as a map, the map as a body, the body envisioned united. The third Korean national flag begetting the South or North Korean flags, when used by co-national cooperative events by the Koreas, is a demonstrated performative ploy of united. But I raise it for some other means, as a mirroring of image of a land divided, a world divided. Avital once asked me, which one is it, Mina? Are you dreaming or protesting? In America, tomorrow, I too will rise up differently. Wake up, America. Thank you, Avital.
Thank you.
Oh, and I have a really quick, I could save the visuals for the end, Chris, if you think that's a better idea.
Forgive me, I had to unmute. Why don't you go ahead, since I'm sure they follow what you've said in some respect, and I'm a little worried about time overall. So
Okay, I'll go really quickly. And my visual is really just a kind of visual cataloging of the presentation. I just need to. Excuse me, everyone. I'm trying to do a share. Here we go. I think I'm. It is not allowing me to do that quickly. So I will pass, and if I have a moment towards the end, I would love to share the images I've prepared. Thank you.
Well, very good. Thank you. Thank you so much, Mina. And I'll just pass directly, given time consideration, I'll pass directly to Susan. Avi, we'll ask you to respond at the end. Is that okay? Rather than immediately. Susan, if you're ready to go, please.
Yeah, I'm ready. Okay,
and
thank you,
welcome.
Chris. So
Okay.
again, many thanks to Chris for the invitation and to Nemanja for organizing, and most of all to Avital for this beautiful book and your very interesting and enticing remarks at the beginning of this session. So I'll echo Mina that if I'd heard that, I might have responded differently. But or not differently, but just perhaps otherwise. Anyway, so I just have some brief remarks. They're a little bit impressionistic, but I'll just go ahead. So the thing that was most remarkable to me in Avital Ronell's America, the Troubled Continent of Thought, is its capacity to hold open ambivalence. And this is a capacity, I think, that's very important and that we don't have much of in our society today. Ronell traces out a strangely circular logic by which what is European is imported to America, even as its condemnation of America is articulated. This would be something like the fruitfulness of poverty or its fundamental ambivalence. And here we have a little bit Heidegger's logic of the Gestell, where being is most obfuscated, that's where the possibility of its appearance emerges, as he articulates in the question of technology. And he quotes Hölderlin's word, wo aber Gefahr ist, wächst das Rettende auch. Where there is danger, what is saving also grows. So that's from Frage nach der Technik. So Avital points out, introduced by a notable dash, quote, there's an outside chance, though, that the near vacancy of inheritable tropologies offers an opportunity for a different kind of representation and critical inflection, grounded in the exigencies of a more hardened experience of poverty, the distress of philosophical reflection, when its loss of ground is not in dispute, comes to be showcased by and in America, which continues to supply a huge depot for foreign discursivities. Interestingly, the foreign is also situated at the heart of the American adventure. It's on page 15. This makes good the crucial point in Hölderlin's famous letter to Behrendorf, cited cursively on page 9. One can only appropriate what is foreign, says Hölderlin. The university in particular marks the spot where the impossible becomes the possible. Ronell remarks on how, quote, America with nearly dialectical finesse operates as an enormous reception center, a unique import-export hub, betting on a ground-level incapacity as the only chance for re-originating stale inventories of European reasoning, be they incubated in ancient Greek thought or frankly made in America as a side hustle of university culture, still short on emergent world sectors of cultural ebullience. Ronell rightly suggests how the European tradition can be renewed or even sometimes opened for the first time in its American borrowings, pointing out how this lending library of philosophical personnel tends to be one way. I would like to stress the nearly dialectical finesse she mentions, for the logic of back and forth outline does not sublate into a higher unity. Indeed, one of the main virtues of America, both the place and the book, is its ability to keep the poles of ambivalence open to avoid collapsing or reducing oppositions or conflicts. This is part of America's dream logic. It's the dream that holds together philosophy and poetry, another infiltration of the interpenetration of the own and the foreign. Ronell examines the work of American philosopher Stanley Cavell on Emerson in order to investigate the overlap of these two pairs, Euro-American and American on the one hand and philosophy and poetry on the other. Cavell is stunned, both he and Ronell write, to discover La Coulabart and Nancy's work, L'Absolu littéraire, the important work presenting the German romanticism of especially Friedrich Schlegel. Cavell focuses on the philosophy-poetry pairing, as he writes, and this is a quote from Cavell, accepting the thesis presented by La Coulabart and Nancy that the idea of literature becoming its own theory, literature in effect becoming philosophy, while contrariwise philosophy becomes literature, is what constitutes romanticism in its origin in the Athenaeum, and beginning to see Emerson's responsiveness to that Athenaeum material or to its sources or its aftermath, my wonder at Emerson's achievement is given a new turn. Unquote. Ronell locates this as a site of haunting in Cavell, pinpointing beautifully the unhinging effect of this presence, absence, and disorientation. And here, a possible question for Avital is, could you elaborate on the sidebar on page 40 about haunting and sources? It's just throwing that out. Cavell focuses in on this Schlegel fragment. Quote, this is from Schlegel. The whole history of modern poetry is a running commentary on the following brief philosophical text. All art should become science, and all science art. Poetry and philosophy should be made one, unquote. La Coulabard and Nancy point out that, quote, a veritable romantic unconscious is discernible today, unquote, suggesting the language of repression and taboo that surrounds Cavell's discovery of the literary absolute. It's as if the thinking of the joining of philosophy and poetry were itself the unconscious desire of the philosopher, but one which cannot quite give space to the infinite deferral of this unity. Cavell describes, quote, or suppose someone has persisted in such thoughts about poetry and philosophy as are expressed in Schlegel's words, and the craving persists for a transformed philosophical diet. But certain texts and ways of reading text will remain repressed, whatever has made its way into some approved canon. Texts and ways of reading I repress in myself, under disapprovals I cannot name, such as repression is made for, unquote. The so-called veritable romantic unconscious that La Coulabard and Nancy describe is repeated as an unconscious of the literary absolute itself, both the entity and the book. And yet, what the literary absolute opens up is nothing completely strange or new. La Coulabard and Nancy write, quote, we are not engaging in an archival enterprise. We are not concerned with the reconstitution of the past. Romanticism does not lead us to anything that one might imitate or that one might be inspired by. And this is because it leads, first of all, to ourselves. So it is a French reading of a German tradition that leads the American philosopher Cavell to Emerson or to itself. And this is not the first or last time that the literary absolute plays this role. Here I might open an autobiographical note if there were time. Avital marks the surfacing of this blending of philosophy and poetry, which is not a sublation or totalization in Cavell, as haunting that endangers. Quote, revealing a chip that obsesses, haunts the writer, taunts the heritage he thought to have understood, inflects a shaky reception reluctantly welcomed. According to Cavell's frank confession, the first haunting from which the text on America emerges involves a stunned discovery made by the philosopher, one that pushes him away from the relative safety of Richard Rorty, veering away from the course charted by his academic writing career. He suddenly comes upon two sets of European thought minds. Stunned and staggered, Cavell encounters for the first time text signed by Nancy and La Coulabard, unquote. Interestingly, the question of the relation between poetry and philosophy gets articulated as an issue of the problem of curriculum or canonization, what, as Cavell says, one is willing to read. Cavell again, I am talking about starting to read the texts associated with the Athenaeum as though they had been forbidden me. Of course, this may be an excuse for personal ignorance or intellectual laziness, or on a more public scale for American belatedness, or on a more cosmic scale for maintaining philosophy's outdated jealousies. It opens for me, in any case, the issue of what one finds oneself ready to read, which is a way of saying the issue of curriculum, unquote. So another question for Avital is how might we connect the registers of psychoanalysis on one hand and canonization or Bildung in her reading of America, or as a problem of America? And I think curriculum is and inheritability are major problems we have in this country today. Finally, America surfaces in America, the book, as a fundamental uprootedness or homelessness, a feature that connects the American with the figure of the Jew. Avital points to the affinity between anti-Americanism and anti-Semitism in Heidegger. There might be an uncanny link between them that characterizes the uncanny itself. She brings up Freud's description of the American experience of the mobile home, which she just talked about again, rigged onto trucks on the highway, an extreme form of displacement. Like Kafka's description of the relation between German and Yiddish, so close, the relationship so zart und bedeutend, so tender and meaningful, that no translation is possible. Could we extend this to the relationship between what is American and what is Jewish, are both figures of a mise en abîme of identity? And maybe I wonder if Avital might say a little bit more about this relationship. So those were my remarks. Thank you all for listening.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you very much. Um, I wonder if I add remarks, is that going to overload with regard to responses you might want to make, or should I just add a couple thoughts at this point and then see where we go?
I would be delighted to hear from you. I just wanted to suggest that Marla Morris has just written a book on curriculum, deconstructing it, and which would be a wonderful way to start a response to Susan's articulations. Go ahead, Chris, please.
Well, we have shared many years of reflecting on our situations, living in New York and the US, in a transatlantic, also kind of professional capacity, and we've shared that in friendship and professional bases, and so it's I feel in very familiar territory with you with this book, and it's it's great, it's great to read it, and I want to thank you. I was as when we had a book discussion, there was a book discussion in NYU, and this took place right around the time of the election, and a little bit after it, I think, and now we are having a discussion after the inauguration, and I can't get over the feeling as we think about the topic of theory and philosophy and poetry in America, that we're at a moment kind of reckoning, or that we need to undertake some reckoning, because in a certain sense, our projects, if we look at them in a let's just say in an applied sense, our projects have failed. And certainly the institutions that we're involved with have failed quite dramatically, and we see that I think in the crushing of academic freedom, and the way in which, as you said, we are targets, and we're targets by I can't say we now because I don't teach in America, but many American faculty are targets of their own institutions precisely for critical thinking. A critical thinking which has very shaky grounds now, in relation to the anti-woke powers that are at work, in the administrations of these institutions, but in the larger administration. And it calls, I think, all of this calls for a very serious return to the question of how we think about the relation between politics and our political world and our work, or our thought, our efforts in thought and in critical thought. It is, I think this has to be done very soberly and very, and I think it's quite urgent. And again, I do think I would, this is an impossible question. I mean, it's and it takes me to what I said at the very beginning. Your book is both very timely and untimely, unzeitgemäß. And my question, if I have a question for you, is how you think about that with respect to our let's just say our task, as thinkers. You said a little bit about that, that we have to be doing a deconstruction of the powers that be, or the ideological constructions that are being constructed. At which point someone might come back and say, "Yeah, well, look where that's gotten us." It is so, and I don't mean to be cynical like that at all. I do believe that there is such a task, but the question then is how we think about its timeliness, the time of it, how we gauge its practical effectivity, and its place in the moment. And there, again, I think that we need to be thinking a little bit more about what thinking does in temporal terms with respect to these kinds of events. Now, with regard to time, I don't know. There's so many things that, again, this for me with you, it's a little bit like carrying on one of our, for me, beloved telephone conversations. But I read recently I think I just saw, you get these news feeds in the mobile phone. I think it was coming out of the New Yorker or something, but some opinion writer was afraid that we were entering a period where the progressive voices would slip into moral apathy, or that the American people would slip into moral apathy. And at that moment, I thought, oh, let's think about this temporal moment, because I'm not sure that the Trump phenomenon is really so dramatically new in this sense. I think it's an epiphenomenon in some respects in relation to this question of moral apathy. I mean, we come to this horrifying choice of of such a figure for president after a moment in which a Democratic president has been supporting genocide. And there is no talk about it, or it is suppressed, actively suppressed. And I don't see big complaints about that suppression going on. It's certainly not in the let's just say in the official administrative quarters of the Democratic Party. There has certainly been protest, but it has been it has not been able to budge this moral apathy, I think, which has gripped this nation anyway, and others, certainly in relation to the situation in Gaza. So it is we have to think really, and you mentioned nihilism, and you referred to me with that. I'm grateful. I do think we're in a moment of a disclosed nihilism, which has now reached, in that diagnosis of the various levels of nihilism that Heidegger entertains, has reached an extreme point. And what Trump is very effectively doing is playing with that nihilism by undermining all fundamental values with these ridiculous appointments he's making to cabinet figures and cabinet positions and so forth. So anyway, I'm just thinking about time. At this your timely way of publishing this very important book at such a time. I just wondered if you had any thoughts in that context. But I'll let you. Sorry?
Go ahead.
No, I'll let you respond as you will to the three of us, and I'm very, very grateful for those who preceded me and for your response.
Philosophy, according to Cavell, reading Emerson is a way for us to offboard attachments and go deep into mourning, and to visit with what is most pernicious and most, let's say, endangering. Heidegger's last words were on danger. He should know. But before I just give 2 or 3 little marks of my responsiveness capacity, I want to thank everyone who's been online and promoting the possibility of thinking and saying and the unsaying, and also understanding close to the heart of Ceylon how to stay with the upset. Earlier, I was going to introduce my work in terms of Camus' revolt, what it means to revolt, to be revolted, and have one's stomach revolting or revolving and ready to throw up and so on. But also Ceylon's upset, which La Coulabat urges us to remember, that he says, stay with the upset. And that's where the anger kind of stream was going, which is, how can we stay with the upset and lean into defeat? I want to thank Mina and Susie and Chris and all of you for showing up to make these considerations and sticking points maybe more alive in a certain way. I just have a couple of things to say, which is, when you're teaching, remember that there's a thrall with regard to thinking. People are not shut down, they're being shut down. But there's something about leaning into defeat without starting a triumphal, let's say, manic response. But remembering, especially in the way that Susan, and also I will get to Mina momentarily, urged, remembering that poverty, by the way, there's something going around from Schelling about on internet about philosophy only yielding poverty and impoverishment, and the scandal of its own impoverishment, and understanding that it's so poor, it has nothing to offer you. But that's the good news. That's our only chance. When philosophy thought it had something to offer you, it was on a death march that, it's very, very disturbing. So I'm also very wary of the promising poses and awakened illumination that philosophy thinks it can adopt for itself. Let me just say that there's something about destitution. Thoreau said his best and the only readers, the exemplary readers, would be a poor American. So, he doesn't say stoopy or stupid, but so bereft and so close to the bone of loss that something is going to happen in this vacancy that Susan also unfolded for us. Now, the other attitude, which is not, as Susan indicated, I don't totalize, I can't synthesize, I don't want to offer a dialectical summation or say this is the way to handle it. But when Mina had me with my pink artillery arsenal ready to fight, I do want to say, in France, the institutional forms of sanctioned teaching and saying and mouthing off, they hate America. They think, as Mina pointed out, that America has, you were going to point it out, contaminated France, and thought has sent back a kind of French theory that is fully psychotic, yay, and unrecognizable, that our symptoms were just thrown back to France and is destroying the great virtue of French thought on so many levels, and that America is a problem. So I was invited by Isabelle and Alphonse Dary and Marc Goldschmidt and others to respond as a kind of American crazy person, I suppose. But I put on my Nietzsche outfit and I said, I want a good fight. I'm not afraid of your institutional self-appropriation. It doesn't persuade us anymore. You're just, your reactivity is loathsome to us. And you weren't complaining when your grapes weren't working out for your wine yield. So here's my grapes of wrath moment. And you transplanted them to California, and a shout out to our Californian fire victims. You weren't upset that we hybridized and so on, and worked on the grapes and sent them back to you to replant as a French wine. So back off and watch what Americans can do in our emptiness and poverty. And you're lucky we're eating you. So I was suddenly, I don't know, this was my New York kind of attitude bullshit that came up. And it was a kind of Nietzschean thrill. I don't know how legitimate I can make it. I'm not trying to, of fighting it, duking it out with the naysayers. So I think I took a large dosage of Nietzsche narcotics and showed up with the understanding that compared to their kind of Bildungskultur and brilliant education system and all that, we still know how to work from the dust motes that we've inherited from their rejects. I've said the word reject a few times. I just want to say that there's such a complicated and incorporated problem that the New World has with old Europe. The minute Rumsfeld and Bush called it old Europe, you knew, though it wasn't new, that there was a parasital war cry. If they're the old world and the father, they're going to be mowed down. At the same time, they're super egoically, they are, I'm both and all of them. And I want to remind us that Nietzsche, finally, there was a moment where he does do an identificatory power grab, and he says he's African. So everyone else can fuck off with their stupid identitarian pathos. Doesn't convince him. So I want to say a few things here, which are perhaps they would need very careful and loving speculative care to get legit, which is we do have split off parts. Maybe that's not so bad sometimes. So that you just saw me enact a kind of warrior brat American, yeah, try me kind of attitude. And I'd like that to come up, but also without the deluded sense that we have some plenitude or fullness to contribute, but to lean into the defeat and the emptiness. Now, just to twerp a little in a funny way, don't forget again that the gauntlet was thrown on around the question of poetry. So Lenau, who somehow came from Habsburg to Baltimore and freaked out at how empty America is, also spent some time in Ohio. He said, America can never be poetically enriching. You know why? Because they don't have a nightingale. So we're screwed. We don't have the basic animal companionship to create poetry in America. And if we could get back to a kind of micrological level of philosophical bailouts and poetic witnessing, I know I'm saying too quickly and I'm trying to respond to all of you simultaneously. And do your work, because that's, in times of great defeat, that's when a lot of art movements start, as Mina was suggesting by her example. And that's when a lot of creativity, when you have a gun to your head and you're being persecuted by the impossible idiocy of what's coming down the pike, that's when some of us get ready to to roll, to write, to inscribe, to think, and to bring others out of their stupor. But don't forget that that's where poetry, art, and film and philosophy excel, that we are the greatest mourning disorder. We can't get over it. We can't let it go. We're obsessed and nocturnally rendered delirious, but we're on it, you know. I don't think there can be maybe a saving, a rescue, Boca is. Thank you for that, Susie, though, but it's very important. Where there's danger, said Hölderlin, quoted by Heidegger, quoted by Susan Bernstein, that's where whatever rescue, mission transmission, or marking can at least show up in some way, maybe unrecognizably so. But it's danger that engenders what we do best and are most wretched about and obsessed by. And it's not easy what we do. And it's devalued culturally more and more. So even your families wonder, what are you doing? You know, but there's nothing more, according to Hölderlin, innocent and necessary, and put on the level of a noble pushback, I think, than what you all are doing, even though doing itself is done for.
Avi, I'll just say that's a beautiful answer to at least my question.